I want to get started with our first fireside chat here with a few members from ResearchHub. We have the two co-founders, Brian and Patrick. And so Brian is the CEO of Coinbase and the CEO of ResearchHub. And we're really lucky to have had him kind of like place this vision out into the world a few years ago to kickstart what ResearchHub's already been. And Patrick for co-founding that with him and really taking his open science ethos and building that strongly into the platform as well too. And we have Ricardo here from the ResearchHub Foundation, who it's almost a tradition every year for him to moderate this fireside chat. So we keep the tradition going. So yeah, let's get started.
Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, this is a great tradition. Really, really happy to have you again for our fireside chat. So maybe to kick things off, I'd like to ask you both if there's, personally one thing right now that you're, most excited about, regarding like what ResearchHub is doing. So yeah, if you want to share something.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say that although I'm co-founded ResearchHub, all the credit really goes to Joyce and the team that are sitting here. And, I was lucky enough to fund ResearchHub early on, and I try to help them here and there, but it's really, they're doing all the hard work. And so all the credit goes to them. I guess just to kick it off, one of the things I'm really excited about with ResearchHub right now is paid peer review. This is an issue in science you probably are all familiar with, but I do think it's a strange oddity of history that peer reviewers don't get paid. It's a valuable thing that they do. We should recognize it, reward it. And so it's nice. ResearchHub, peer reviewers are getting paid $150 right now. It's a good start. For some of them that are in countries outside the US, that's a really material amount of money. And we've seen people engage in Brazil from different universities. I think I heard a story yesterday. One professor said that he actually is making more from paid peer review on ResearchHub than he is at his job as a professor at a university in Brazil. So anyway, that's what I'm excited about right now.
That's a great answer. What I'm personally most excited about with the project in general is aligning financial incentives. So I think a lot of issues in science come from the way that we actually fund research. It encourages people to partake in like less than ideal behaviors in order to get more grants in the future. So we're rethinking how to like recognize value in science. We have tokens rewarded to authors based on whether they generate citations, but it's filtered through, is there an open access paper? Is there open data? And is that paper pre-registered? So the idea is trying to essentially like reward folks with finances for doing good research. So that's something I'm very excited about. And then also we're funding new science projects using pre-registrations. So yeah, just using a token incentive in order to encourage scientists to participate in healthy research behaviors.
Interesting, yeah. And how do you see the community responding to this, basically, to the shift in incentives? Like, we had recently, changed our rewarding algorithm on the platform. And so you can see how, the community is responding basically to this change in the algorithm. So as you can say, like, incentives are really powerful, and the possibility to like, change it on the platform to incentivize specific behaviors. Like, do you see the community responding in a specific way when you're changing these incentives?
Yeah, so I personally feel very honored. Like I never graduated with a PhD. I dropped out with a master's. And so it's like, I feel like the dumbest person in the room now because we're paying peer reviewers and there are all these brilliant people coming to the site who have these like incredible careers. And so, yeah, it's like a whole new world this year where we have like extremely talented scientists who are like showing up because we have the ability to essentially compensate them for their hard work, which they deserve.
Awesome. Okay. So another thing I wanted to ask you is, there's definitely some trends, every year, every decade, we have some trends happening in research. And so from your perspective, like what are some of the most interesting trends that you see right now in general, like in research happening, and how, ResearchHub could play a role in this like shift? For example, just like giving you, some hints, AI's role in research, some of the founding challenges that we're facing, even like the public trust in science, which has been eroded a bit in the past years. Like, you want to share anything about this?
Yeah, I can kick it off. So yeah, that's what I was just thinking about too, is there has been this loss of trust in institutions, and you can measure it like, Pew Research puts out a bunch of studies on this, and whether it's Congress or the media, there's a bunch of things, big business, big tech, everything has lost trust. But science has also lost trust. You see that in our big institutions. I think, in the last year or two, the presidents of Harvard and Stanford resigned due to allegations of, basically manipulating data or forging. Like it was, what was it? It was basically like plagiarism. That's the word I'm thinking of. Thank you. So that was not great. I mean, and then, the NIH has a culture of some risk aversion, right? And the grants are kind of going to people who are more and more established in their career. But if you look at when people did Nobel Prize winning work, it tends to be earlier in their career. COVID didn't help. There's all these political things happening now with vaccines and all this kind of stuff, right? So there is a loss of trust. And I think we've seen that, for instance, in media, people have started to create new institutions to try to, pick up the pieces, if you will. And so we're seeing long form podcasts or, X platform or community notes. And I think that in science, there is an opportunity to try to do something like this again, even prediction markets, right, versus the pollsters in the election. And so actually the trend that I'm maybe excited about most is prediction markets in science. And, touching on something Joyce mentioned about pre-registration, if somebody puts out a study with good describing the methodology, pre-registers it, maybe you should even define that for people more rigorously. I think it gives an opportunity for people in a prediction market to sort of make a prediction and say, we think this experiment will resolve to yes or no. Maybe that can help fund the experiment. It also helps with replication in the crisis. So if somebody wants to put up a prediction market to see if this study will actually replicate, it can expose fraud. It can validate studies that actually were valid. So I think prediction markets is something on the horizon in science, which could re-establish what is true and try to get closer to truth and bring that skeptical nature that science is famous for.
Yeah, one thing I'm personally very excited about is that grant givers are starting to realize how much leverage they have as basically the source of financial resources. So if you look at like the Gates Foundation or CZI, they've started to require pre-printing as part of receiving a grant. And then like the Nelson memo, where any taxpayer funded research in the US will actually be required to be open access and have open data. So I think it's really powerful that like these funders who like make all of this science actually happen understand that they have a lot of leverage in the scientific economy, and they can make sure that like we get the most value out of the content that they help to fund.
This is actually a great segue into my next question, which was exactly about, we're seeing this like shifts toward more like, open access policies. So you mentioned the Nelson memo, for example. How do you see this like policy changes affecting, ResearchHub work, basically? Do you think like this will accelerate engagement with a platform like ResearchHub or potentially create new challenges for us? How do you see that happen?
So I'm kind of like an open science maxi, but I think it's the best thing possible. I know I was very lucky to, start a PhD at a great institution where you have access to like all these journals. And then like you leave that environment and you just want to read a paper and you can't find it. And that's incredibly frustrating. And so like on ResearchHub right now, like we're very, very careful to follow all like copyright laws. And so there are paywalled papers where we actually can't have the content on the site. And it's very disappointing because like some of the best science is published behind paywalls. And so I think in this kind of like new environment where like, government funded research has to be open access, there's just going to be a lot more cool content on ResearchHub that we can comment on, like place grants on top of and like do interesting things with. So yeah, I'm very excited for the future.
Anything to add, Brian?
No, it makes intuitive sense, right? If taxpayers are paying for that research, why shouldn't it be open access? That just seems intuitively true to me. And so you got to give credit to I think it was the Biden administration who got that passed. So I think it's, the end of 2025 or early 2026? I can't remember. All these government funded research papers will be open access. It won't be retroactive, but I think it will be that going forward. And that should be really a sea change in how journals operate. I mean, really the whole business model of journals might need to change. And that's what we're hoping to do with ResearchHub is really make this modern system that it's kind of like the preprint servers, but it actually has published peer-reviewed journals, papers as well, all open access. People can discuss it. They can get funding for the next project. They can see if it replicates. I mean, you can see how more and more of these pieces come together and you can start to actually accelerate science.
Totally. And along with papers being open access, I think a really important piece of the puzzle is having the data to be transparent. So for example, in ResearchHub, we are incentivizing, to basically upload open data if you have it in your paper. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to replicate a paper, you need the data, you need the methodology to, check exactly what the authors did. And I saw that myself because, being a scientist, many, many times I tried to replicate studies that unfortunately didn't replicate. So with data transparency becoming more and more critical, how's ResearchHub, adapting to this push? Is there anything particular that we, have done already that ResearchHub is planning to do in the future, basically to adapt to this push about data transparency?
Yeah, well, you probably have a better answer here, but I mean, just to add on quickly, I think you could imagine a version of ResearchHub in the future where the data sets, the code is really packaged right along with the paper. I mean, the idea that a research paper comes in a PDF is kind of an antiquated idea. You could imagine a version of it that is more digitally native. A PDF implies that something is frozen in time and it's static. But what you really want, I think, is some like software on GitHub. It's never really done. It's always being modified, changing. Version 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and you can annotate it with data sets and the actual code being used, and people can submit bug requests, and they can also, of course, fork it and take it in a new direction, right? And then merge things back together. And so I think open source software is a much better model to think of what research could become. And I hope that when we're sitting here in 10 years, the PDF as the standard research paper artifact is a thing of the past.
Yeah, totally. So with open source software, one of the challenges is that everybody can read your code. So you have to have really good code or else problems can arise. And I think that that's a very powerful thing where in science, for instance, like we mentioned earlier, there's a little bit of a lack of trust in institutions over the past couple of years. And I strongly believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? And if we have transparency around the results of research studies where anyone can go in, audit it themselves, have their own findings that either agree or disagree with the initial author's conclusions, I think it's going to really realign incentives and bring a lot of trust back to these institutions. So yeah, I can't wait to have 2026 occur and have open data and just let everybody go wild trying to criticize these findings and audit them in a very positive way.
Yeah, likewise. And talking about challenges, you just mentioned challenges so it's been now several years. So for me personally, 3 years since I joined ResearchHub. For you, even more since you started building it. I'm really curious to hear what are some of these challenges that you personally faced in building out, this product, but an actual ecosystem of people, the community, everything. What are some of the challenges that you've seen, had to overcome in the past in building out ResearchHub?
It's a great question. So I think two separate things kind of come to my mind. So I come from a scientific background, and a lot of times, traditional scientists, they hear crypto and they kind of roll their eyes and they're disinterested sort of. And so I think being able to communicate to folks how financial incentives are really the core issue that exists within the scientific economy, and how tokens can actually be a very powerful tool to help to realign incentives is not the easiest thing to do at times. But we're actually very lucky where there are a lot of folks in this decentralized science industry who are helping to communicate new ways to basically align financial incentives in entertaining and productive manners. So yeah, I think helping to convince scientists that tokens are not just moon boy Lambo things, but they're actually ways that we can help to increase the quality of research and help to bring about new technologies and higher quality lifestyles for all kinds of people.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of challenges. Of course, a lot of these are not unique to ResearchHub. They're just startup challenges, right? Which how do you attract the right team, and how do you raise some money, and making sure you have a certain basic level of cybersecurity built into the platform, because we'd get fraudsters and spammers and people coming and trying to steal research coin. So these are all the things that maybe a normal startup would go through, which are not insignificant. And I think ResearchHub is still very early on its journey. I mean, it's got. I think the most surprising thing to me that went much better than I expected actually is the passion of the community around it. People really resonated with the mission, and we had dozens of people reach out and kind of say, "Hey, I was thinking of doing a startup in this space. This is my life's work. but I saw what you all are doing, and maybe I can come and help. And the ResearchHub Foundation actually drew in a ton of really talented people. I'll admit, I actually thought, we were having the ResearchHub Foundation as more of like a governance body around the coin and the protocol and how we might, but it turned out to be a huge magnet for talent to come in. And that was a really a big surprise to me. So there's a lot of hard things about building a startup, and DeSci is so new. But the community and how much they felt a passion for the mission was definitely kept ResearchHub going.
Awesome. Yeah, glad to hear that. And I was one of those people fed up with the system. Again, once you're trying to replicate stuff several times, you start questioning yourself if you're doing good science or not. You're like, okay, I want to try to change this. And then I saw you guys, and I was like, okay, probably better to join them and try to build with them. Cool. So from challenges to potential things that we could develop in the future, how's 2025 is looking like for ResearchHub? Anything exciting you want to share with the public?
Yeah, so to reiterate, I'm very excited about funding new research and aligning financial incentives using pre-registrations. And so just to define what a pre-registration is, it's essentially like a blueprint for your research. You share like an introduction, abstract, a hypothesis that you're testing, methods on how you plan to test it, and then a priori, so beforehand, a plan for statistical analysis. This is super important because it basically prevents folks from doing things like p-hacking or changing their project halfway through in order to get more significant results. That actually hurts the reproducibility of the research at the end of the day, but might help you get a better publication. So yeah, thinking through new ways to fund research that help to create more rigorous results at the end of the day that have higher reproducibility and then higher quality information is what I'm personally most excited about.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited about funding as well. I think that's something that ResearchHub can help a lot with. I'll just rattle off a few others. So, with paid peer review, that's actually a really great stepping stone to have ResearchHub be its own official journal, right? So people will eventually just get published in ResearchHub, and there is I think a high demand from folks who want to get published and get more visibility on their projects. So that'll be a good one. I already mentioned prediction markets. I think that could be an interesting feature to integrate. And we talked about adding in the code and the data sets right alongside the paper and having people sort of publish in a native format. We already have in ResearchHub an electronic lab notebook, and so people can draft it. We hope eventually people will draft papers there along with the code and the data sets and actually publish them there as living evergreen documents that people could fork and submit changes to. I guess one more I'll mention is kind of like a future-facing idea that we haven't had any time to work on yet, but I think is cool. Maybe somebody listening on the live stream or here could help us with it. But I think ultimately we're doing a lot of scientific research to try to improve the human condition or life on Earth and advance civilization, and so we have to actually translate science into real-world products, services, goods. And of course, we're all beneficiaries of science, from wearing eyeglasses to, I guess, the invention of fire or the wheel or whatever, So civilization is really built on these scientific advancements. And it's very difficult right now to translate academic research into the real world. There are these tech transfer offices that exist at universities. And it's this very laborious, bespoke process to go into a tech transfer office and sort of talk to a bunch of lawyers and, hey, maybe we would license this thing or maybe not. And of course, it's sort of this, dirty secret of science that, it's like 99.9% of all papers really never have an impact on the real world in some product or service. If you look at like the Stanford Tech Transfer Office, I think there's only been 2 or 3 major pieces of research that have contributed almost all the value. I mean, one of them ended up creating Genentech. Another one ended up creating Google. And there's probably a long tail of other ones, but almost all the papers that come out of Stanford or any university, they just don't translate to real world products. And so we've always had this thought, like, in Y Combinator, they have this, it was always kind of bespoke how companies were raising their initial bits of money. And so Y Combinator came out with this template called the SAFE, the Simple Agreement for Equity. And it was essentially all startups could just use this, and it had standard terms for a convertible note. And it made it kind of like an assembly line of, instead of every suit being bespoke, it's like, okay, you could buy it off the shelf now. And every startup could just use this, and it had good standard terms. Investors knew what it was. And so we've tried to think about this for ResearchHub. I mean, if people are starting to put more of their research on ResearchHub as an original place, not something that went elsewhere and we ingested it for the community. Could it come along with a standard set of terms for people to license that research? Imagine if there was a safe kind of equivalent that said, click if you want to license this original research, click a button, and 1% of the revenue from any product derived would go to the creator or the university or the lab or whoever published it, whoever owns the rights to it. And it's just a standard terms. Now, we might see a lot more people licensing this. They never have to talk to a lawyer. They never have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on some custom contract. And so I'm hoping that it would help actually translate more science into real world products. So that's kind of a cool idea too.
Cool. A lot of interesting ideas for next year, it looks like. Okay, so obviously I wanted to have, the public, our audience, to also ask some questions. But before we wrap up, Brian, I wanted to ask you, if there's like any advice you like to give to, young entrepreneurs, innovators that, want to enter this space, anything that you want, like to share with them. We have, an audience here. We also have, people online. So if there's any, couple words that you want to say.
Well, I mean, ResearchHub is still very early in our journey, so it's in some ways I feel a little silly giving advice on DeSci. We're still here to figure it out too, along with all of you. But I mean, one thing I'll just say on entrepreneurship in general is, one of my favorite sayings from Paul Graham is action produces information. And so oftentimes people in startups, it's really hard to see too many steps ahead into the unknown of what the world might look like in a few months or a few years. And so you just have to start doing something. And it could be anything, even the wrong thing will produce information. And so we've always tried to have that sort of bias for action at ResearchHub. And we'll sit there and we'll debate and like, should we do X or Y? Would it look better like this or that? And eventually you just got to try it. Stop debating, stop doing in hypothetical land. The same thing, if you have an idea for a product or a company or at some point you just got to try it. And almost certainly the first thing you do will be wrong. But if you just keep showing up and do 10, 20, 100 wrong things, eventually you'll get some that action will produce the information that will give you the right idea. But you can't get to the right idea just by sitting and thinking. You have to actually take action.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So I'll open up the floor for questions. See, there's many. So let me start from the back.
Kia ora, Adam Hyde from Coco. We're in this space. We build Kotahi's open source software in this space. And thank you for the invitation. Great first discussion. So a lot of your references point to the journal. And I think over the last 10 years, 15 years, there's been a lot of effort in trying to pull the journal down because it's got a lot of problems. A lot of those problems are cultural. And I see you working on a lot of things, almost everything all at once, formats, everything, blah, blah, blah. But you also seem to be talking about things that reinforce the journal, which are problematic, right? So you talked about hopefully one day will be a journal. And I'm kind of wondering how you address or what your strategies are culturally to start shifting journal out from the center of the culture. If you have any sort of strategies or thoughts around that.
Yeah, totally. And it's a great question. I think with the journal product that we're building, we're kind of trying to meet people halfway, essentially. That publications are a huge part of a scientist's career. And again, like I mentioned earlier, like a lot of folks aren't super interested in earning tokens because again, like the currency in like their own careers are citations, publications in order to get your next grant. And so like big picture, ideally what we'd like to happen is be able to provide sort of for the like publication currency that like is the standard kind of practice of like how you define someone's success in science and slowly transition them to new incentives. Where like if you're able to maybe just like get funding for your next experiment by creating high quality content and you don't have to apply for a grant the next time, then maybe you don't have to worry about how many citations your paper gets and you can optimize towards creating high quality content that's valued by the people in your community. So yeah, it's a great question. And we definitely do not want to reinforce this sort of like standard hierarchy of like impact factor and prestige. And really it's more about like meeting folks where they are and helping them along and understand how financial incentives can be changed in the future.
Yeah, I not too much to add. I think it's a really good question, and maybe we can follow up on it after. This often happens. Anytime you're trying to disrupt something, you often, it's a debate of how closely should it resemble the thing, right? It's like, how closely should YouTube look like television, or how close should your crypto wallet resemble a bank or something? So in this case, I think just as a very tactical item, we thought, okay, if people are doing peer review, to what end they want to get published, but let's not recreate the sins of the journals. So it may be a journal that doesn't, look like the ones of the past. But you're right. It could be we end up in a world soon where it looks more like GitHub or something totally different. So you kind of have to meet people where they are, but help them get to the next step too. And that's always a balance. So if you have something specific you think what that might look like, it'd be cool to hear more after.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Marincula from the Science for Africa Foundation and former CEO of PLOS. I really resonate with all your comments. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. A comment and a question. The comment is, I'd like to remind you that even funds that don't come directly from the public, like the NIH, are publicly subsidized through tax advantages. So don't limit your comments about the fairness of using public funds to actual public sources.
Good point.
The second thing I wanted to ask you about was Diamond Open Access. If you have a view on Diamond Open Access, meaning free to publish, free to access, free to reuse. In Africa, we're really getting behind the efforts in South America to push for Diamond Open Access, especially with the G20 meeting in South Africa next year. We've managed to get on the agenda to discuss Diamond Open Access with the G20 because we feel, of course, it's an economic and equity issue, again, especially for researchers in Africa. So if you have any sense of the role ResearchHub or just ideas about Diamond Open Access, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, it's an awesome question. And ideally, we'd like to get to a place where anyone can publish and read the content on ResearchHub for free. And I want to shout out the work done by preprint servers, who I think have done a fantastic job changing the culture around getting rid of publication fees for science. And I just want to echo the opinion where there are so many talented people in the world. They're not all located in the United States, or in London. And one of the most beautiful things about GitHub to me is that anyone with internet access can read open source code, learn how to build something. And I think we need to get there as a scientific community. And so, I think Diamond Open Access is a very important thing. And we want to help to reinforce those types of cultural behaviors. So that way, you never know where the next Albert Einstein is going to come from. And we want to help provide opportunities for people, regardless of where they're born, to help participate in the scientific economy.
Hi. Thank you so much. My name is Olga Botvinnik. I founded a nonprofit research institute called CNOM. And really resonate with what you've talked about today. I'm curious, who are you either targeting or who is coming to you already with their research? And speaking as a former trainee in science, I had many a debate with my PhD advisor about where to publish and wanting to make a small publication about this cool tool I wrote, but no biologist would use it unless it's in Cell. Okay, fine, I'll publish in stupid Cell so I can graduate. And I'm curious, as a trainee, I found many other trainees had similar sentiments to me as this system's so stupid, why are we here? And why do we have to do it this way? But I ran into issues with people above me about my career advancement and to be able to continue having to do that. So are you seeing people PhD students, postdocs, people who or in other institutes who are using ResearchHub to fund their research and show some demonstrated initial results to get some buy-in from their advisor? I think that could be an interesting transitional group to help with the ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. So like early career scientists, I think is the type of folks that we resonate the most with, just because like you mentioned, they see the problems, they're affected by it every day, and they're often motivated to fix them. They know that there are better solutions out there. So yeah, we're very lucky to have folks like Ricardo. You know, myself, I was an early career PhD student, and I'd say that's the grand majority of our early community. We are very lucky though, where like maybe in the past year or so, we've had a couple of PIs jump into our community, some later stage postdocs at like awesome institutions. So yeah, largely I'd say the folks who are most passionate about ResearchHub are those who are aware of the issues that come along with sort of this like antiquated like paywall journal ecosystem and are like motivated, you know, from an internal place to try and fix it.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think the early adopters are the folks that are early in career, or they have sometimes they have more of like a computer, like machine learning, AI kind of background, or something that causes them to be internet native and willing to think outside the box. And to use like the YouTube analogy, I think it's interesting. Like the early YouTube videos people were putting up, they were not the most prestigious. They were like, you know, a silly video of a cat or something. And we had to kind of curate initially the early developers, and then it started to take on a life of its own. And it was really good content, but it didn't look like a big Hollywood movie or big budget TV show. And so, but you know, it got more, they leaned into how they were different and unique. And then over time, it became actually bigger than the TV stations, right? And it's now, if you have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, it's way better than having a TV show on NBC or something. So we're hoping that we see that change happening. We just kind of want to lead, but it's going to take a decade or more for that really play out in society, where somebody will, you know, win the Nobel Prize on ResearchHub, or maybe we'll call it the ResearchHub Prize. And that'll be actually seen as even more important, or it reached a wider group of people or had a bigger impact because you could actually license it immediately and have products derived from it.
Looking forward to seeing the ResearchHub Prize. Okay, cool. Yeah, we have to wrap up and get to the next session. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Patrick, again for this fireside chat. And yeah.